the motor vehicle sector saw a 19.5% increase in sales in the January month-on-month basis. And joining us now to unpack the data is Sydney Soundy, who's head of vehicle and asset finance at Standard Bank. Sydney, thanks so much for joining us this month again. Let's go through the numbers. 19.5% up on vehicle sales for the January period. What do you make of the headline number?
I think it's a positive number. Except that one should also look at the potential impact of rand exchange rate into the future, and that there's potentially preemptive purchase both from consumers and rental companies in anticipation of increases in vehicle prices into the year.
Of course, you've got consumers at this stage also looking to take advantage of the low interest rate environment still. To what extent has that influenced the way they're getting financing right now? For example, leaning a little bit more heavily on the fixed interest rate side of things.
Yeah, I think if you look at the interest rate levels since the last 3 years or so, they've been at the lowest in the past 30 years. And as a result, the environment in terms of affordability has been very good for consumers. And I think if there's actually one significant factor relating to how the industry is doing in as far as goods sales are concerned, I would say that the low interest rates have played a major part in terms of giving us a sufficient kick of the numbers we've seen in the last 3 years.
To what extent is that true when it comes to all sectors within the vehicle sales categories? I mean, you're looking at passenger vehicle sales, you're looking at light commercial vehicles, and then extra heavy commercial vehicles as well.
The South African industry is much more towards the passenger and light commercial vehicles sector. So a bigger part of sales go into that component of the market. And as a result of that, you'll find that when those sectors are doing well, both in terms of consumers as well as in terms of entrepreneurs with regard to light commercial vehicles, that the industry generally does well. The numbers as far as medium and heavy and extra heavy commercial, including buses, are not that big in terms of volumes, except that obviously in terms of the value of the assets concerned, they are actually quite big. So you'll see that the industry is highly influenced by what happens with the consumer market.
To what extent do you see this a trend holding, though? Because if you're looking at industry at large, these are purchases that a broader industry can only put off for so long.
So if you look at the commercial side, the companies are largely driven by the need for replacements. So it reaches a stage where vehicles are no longer efficient, both in terms of the speed at which they deliver, the effectiveness, but also in terms of the fuel consumption that is related to that vehicle. And this is why commercial institutions are forced at some point to replace their vehicles. But with consumers, it's largely related to how the interest rate cycle looks like, but also the incentives that get promoted in the industry that buoys activity in that environment has a large impact on how consumers behave and how they buy vehicles.
Yeah. So possibly, maybe, a possibility that we could see a changing of trends moving forward. For now, though, I mean, what are you anticipating? Because this pretty much sets the tone for 2013 as we kick this year into gear.
It is actually a positive tone, except, as I've said, that one must just taper it a little bit in relation to the potential that the consumers may have preempted purchase in avoidance of potential increases into the future. But if you look at the trend in terms of the last 3 years, January month has been seen as the third lowest in terms of volumes per month. And if you take that as a trend, and if you think that that were to continue into this year, we would then expect that about 9 months of this year would produce much more higher than the 55,000 units we've seen in January. But as I say, one must just taper it a little bit with regard to the effect that rand exchange rates would have on the prices of vehicles.
Yeah, when we are looking at the rand exchange rate, you've also got to look at our export potential. To what extent are we standing in a good space right now? Because there was a point last year where we were making steady inroads in that regard.
What we see is that there is indeed that steady increase into that market. And given that our local producers have also diversified markets in the rest of the globe, we see that this aspect of the production in South Africa is going to grow significantly. And the program that the Department of Trade and Industry has introduced to bore that activity in that market is also going to help exports into the rest of the continent.